Thank you very much for having me, and thanks for coming along. I'm going to talk about recording intertidal isopods. I don't know if you're familiar with isopods. Of course, you're familiar with isopods. Look, you're familiar with these things here. Our slaters. We've got Aniscus ocellus, the shiny one, and Priscilla scabra, the rough one.
Sorry.
That's okay, so you're familiar with the slaters. What are isopods? They're not just slaters, they're a whole bunch of other stuff. They're crustaceans, they're an order within Crustacea. The most familiar representatives are the slaters or the woodlice. The woodlice. Have a look at the BMIG website if you want to see what woodlice you can find in Britain and Ireland. But there are many other kinds of isopod as well, which vary considerably in their shape and their form and their lifestyle, and they're mostly found in marine environments. Frozen. Thank you. So just a very brief overview of the isopods. So we've got order Isopoda, divided into various families. We've got the Anistidae, the wood lice, we've got the Asolota, which include the water lice, and then we've got loads of other families. We've got families which consist of internal parasites, which shows some pictures of those. External parasites, we don't get those up here, unfortunately, and various other species as well. So for our wood lice, we've got 43 known naturalized species found in Britain and Ireland. We don't get all of them here. There are also other species associated with garden centres and greenhouses, and not time to talk to those. But over the wood lice, maybe the one that you'll find intertidal most often is Legio the sea slater, which is essentially, for all intents and purposes, a marine species or an intertidal species. The wood lice Trichinostoides celerensis is also found just above the intertidal zone in Turkey, essentially in the spray or the mist zone. We've got 5 species of water lice in Britain and Ireland, 2 of which occur in our area, one of which is only not in this area, but discovered last year. And then we've got our marine isopods as well, and they occur in all 4 different marine zones, from the ocean depths to upper salt marsh. I'm not going to talk about exclusively sublittoral isopods because they're beyond the reach of most of us, unless you've got a boat and specialist you can't get them. Fishermen sometimes pull up interesting things to do that. I'm going to talk about the intertidal isopods, but the dividing line between intertidal and sublittoral is, of course, not precise. Sometimes the sublittoral ones can occur on the intertidal zone as well. Let's work this time. So let's look at British and Irish intertidal marine isopods. There are around 79 species, and the number of species are not been imprecise, as I say, for the reason that it's hard to determine what exactly counts as intertidal. If you go onto the BMIG website, you'll get a list of those and details about them. Of those 79 species, 19 are mostly internal parasites of other crustaceans, and we've got some of those shown here. Here's Hemianiscus bolani, which parasitizes barnacles, and this is from East Lothian here. And this is Aphelges pugui, which parasitizes hermit crabs, and this is from East Lothian as well. See a big flaccid female on the hermit crab's body, and then the little tiny male associated with her here around relatively common species in the area. There's a similar number of species which we rarely ever encounter. They're largely sublittoral and occasionally encountered intertidal, leaving 40 species which are more readily encountered intertidally around Britain and Ireland. Although some of them are uncommon and quite restricted. What we find when we look at intertidal isopods, as with many marine species, there's a gradient from the southwest to the northeast, with the southwest being most diverse, the northeast where we are being least diverse. But that doesn't mean we don't get anything interesting. Okay. And they occur in a wide range of habitats, the whole intertidal zone, from upper salt marshes right down to kelpie passes. So they can be found pretty much everywhere. If you want to identify intertidal marine isopods, you're going to need some information, and the best place to go is to Ernst Miller and Jellicoe Brandt's Linnaean synopsis, the intertidal marine isopods. which you can get online, but you can also find the first edition of that freely available online as a PDF, and it's exactly the same apart from some name changes and layout. So that's there for you. If you've got a handbook in marine format from Northwest Europe, it's essentially a pared down version of the same key and whatnot. None of those guides are entirely perfect, and they don't go through all our known intertidal species, and their treatment of the difficult Lepidoptera genus isn't great. So there are other resources that you might want to look at as well. And here's where I'm going to plug the British Myriad Isopod group, which I'm one of the committee members of. The British Myriad Isopod group, you can see its website there. Its slogan is: we aim to improve awareness and knowledge of centipedes, millipedes, pauropods, and phylums, which are the Myriapoda, and woodlice, waterlice, and intertidal isopods, which are the Isopoda in Britain and Ireland. We're responsible for 4 national recording schemes for centipedes, millipedes, woodlice, and waterlice, and the intertidal recording schemes, and I'm responsible for the intertidal one. But I also have a keen interest in the other isopods as well. We produce a newsletter twice a year, a bulletin, a journal bulletin annually, and hold an annual feed meeting. And the next feed meeting is going to be in Cumbria, so there'll be some nice coastal habitat there for us to look at as well. You can join the society for free. BMIG's got loads and loads of resources online, not just for isopods, but for all of its groups. So you can go and have a look at the species accounts and maps and details and so on for the intertidal isopods, but also for the other species as well. There are various other things there that I've got a guide up there on finding intertidal isopods, which is often more complicated than we think. And there's a guide to identifying particular J-rus species as well. And we've got a quite active Facebook group, so if you're on Facebook, go and join the group, and you'll see lots and lots of nice pictures and discussions about various things. And that includes, don't be afraid of people who are interested in stuff. That ranges from everybody who's found an interest in centipede on the law, right through people who do studies on these things. We're very mixed through. Even in our meetings, we have people of all different ranges and purposes. So you, as I say, you can join the group. So let's think about finding intertidal isopods. Identifying them can be easy, but if you can find the things in the first place, finding them can be a rather more difficult challenge, other than a small number of very common species, which you'll pretty much find them everywhere. Here's the argument about looking for isopods. I think this is on the East Lothian coast. This is a Portrush in Northern Ireland, on a much nicer day. I was with my family at Portrush, and I couldn't resist. I just stripped my trousers off and started looking at this. You can see I did bring the bucket, so I was slightly expecting to be with it. So where do you find them? You find them in salt marshes, estuaries, sandy beaches, rock pools, under rocks and seaweed, not up here, but in other parts of Britain and Ireland, attached to fish, in wood, in mud, in other crustaceans, and so on. So we're pretty much everywhere. Low salinity is crucial for some species. Some species are right up there, almost at the freshwater zone. Others right out in the deep sea. The state of the tide is important for finding them. Some species are only found at low tide, especially low springs. I mean, if you can find a low spring that doesn't coincide with work with bad weather, where it's brilliant, of course. Other species, for example, as the tide turns and comes up, you can find species in those circumstances. Weather, season, time of day, and so on can be important. As always, if you're out in the coast, be careful because it's really dangerous. Finding intertidal isopods, there's various methods for finding them, mostly non-specialist methods. Turning stones under seaweed, other debris, especially in hard surfaces. You'll rarely find anything under stones on sand. Different species occupy different parts of the intertidal zone. Here's what we've done in Southwest Devon, grabbing some stuff there. So you'll find things like the common Idotea species and the J-rus species, and then much less common genera right now. The kind of sphere which you find in salt marshes and other places. A really useful technique is get yourself a big bucket. I have a sad story to tell you about this bucket in a minute, but get yourself a big bucket like this, grab some, fill it with water, grab some stuff, churn it about in the bucket, and then sieve it and put the results in a tray, and you can find all sorts of interesting things. This is my trusty bucket that I use for isopoding, and I was on the River Tweed in Berwick a couple of months ago, and I turned my back and it swept away the river near the city against me. I haven't managed to get myself in a really sad day. It's been with me many years. It's very depressing watching it floating away and there'd be nothing up for it. Anyway, you can catch isopods by netting them, especially over sand and low spring tide. You can find all sorts of stuff in salt marsh pools. You'll get your dicey, Intertidal, Hemisphere. There's a nice species of Intertidal in the Airs, which really can only get it low spring tides over sandy beaches. And if you go out onto the sandy beaches, you sometimes find it swimming about in the surf. If you see plots of seaweed, give it a switch around, you can come out of that. So also nice things to be found. Digging and excavating in mud, crevices, lichens, barnacles, wood, and so on. You'll find various species. You can use baited and light traps to find others. It's a bit more involved. If you want parasitic species, you have to find the hosts. Of course, always remember to minimize your impact on the environment, including the populations of the isotopes themselves and respecting the local restrictions and so on. For equipment, you don't need much. You can do this with very non-specialist equipment that I generally do. If I had a bucket, I would use it. I would need to get another one. Specimen tray. This is a cat litter tray from Pets at Home. Plastic sieve from Lakeland. Cheap goldfish net from Pets at Home as well. Does the trick. I have bigger nets, but I rarely use them because it's a pain to carry them around. Fine paint brushes, pets, small spade, paint scraper, specimen pots and containers, hand lens, pen out. Diving gloves are almost essential because you can imagine turning a rock and busted with barnacles like this. Without gloves, you end up with lacerations all over fingers. And I also play the accordion, so I don't want to destroy your finger. Useful to have a small hammer and chisel for certain things, although they're not essential for most things. Camera with macro lens, binocular dissecting microscope, sometimes a compound microscope are useful as well. If you're going to collect sand specimens for photography or microscopic examination, you'll need plastic tubes, but you'll also need glass specimen tubes to store them in petri dishes and usual stuff and preserve them to and just use bioethanol can be in a few weeks to pure bioethanol, which is preserving things in a 70% solution. And then write the labels and stick them inside the tubes eventually. Sometimes you have to examine isopods closely to identify them. We can do most of them can be identified in photographs, sometimes not. You'll need a hand lens times 10 or 20 even better. You might need to put in a plotter tray. Microphotography can be really useful. Or decent quality photographs always needed anyway for a record to be verified. You can put them in petri dishes against the black background, even while snubbing and get a nice photograph background, although they're rarely sit still, so it can be a bit of pain. Fine paintbrushes, extremely fine paintbrushes are one of the best tools to use. I will show you one of those if you want. In some cases, you'll need to examine specimens under a microscope or perhaps dissect them, but most species don't need dissecting, but some do. You can examine them whilst they're live. It's often easier to do it when they've been killed in ethanol solution. They're soft products, you just drop them into the ethanol and whatever quickly. Here's me working with a microscope at home. This is a species you can't see it properly. This is from below called Isopods baltica, which is a common intertidal isopod up to 30 millimeters. You'll find on the east of the south of the Scottish coast. But it's not alone. This black thing slightly obscured. There's a small isopod just there as well, a parasitic isopod. Never recorded since the end of the 19th century in southeast Scotland. I found one at Collingham a couple of years ago attached to this. That's the male 0.5. The female gets inside, turns into an amorphous blob, and lives inside the isopod. There are some identification challenges. Most intertidal isopods are of a similar difficulty to ID as wood lice, and they're not especially hard for the most part. There are some tricky cases as well. But the ubiquitous Geo species, I'll show you some pictures of those as we go along, which you'll get all along the coast, require close examination and often microscopic examination of male and eggs to identify which is which. Likewise with the Hemisphere species, you can just about tell one or two, especially from Seroma, which we don't get up here, but you need this sort of thing to be 100% sure. This is just the sixth leg of a Geo species. The Geo are about 3 millimeters long, so you can imagine this is a tricky operation. And this bulge here tells you which species it is. Very easy to identify which you look at. And then recording the finds, we don't know a great deal about the distribution of these things, where they're found, how they live, and so on. So it's important that we record our finds with the usual information. Of verifier, binomial, where, and so on. photographs where possible, unless it's a common obvious species, and make sure to submit the records. Submit them through iRecord. We'll also get them if you put them in naturalist, but iRecord is the place to go. And we verify records for marine isopods and a lot of groups on them. So if you submit something to there, you'll hear from us sooner rather than later, I suspect. This is what's known as a gribble, which is a kind of marine isopod that lives in wood. We tunnel into wood washed into the sea, go along the grain and form tunnels, then that collapses, then do it again and again and again. And it's a little kind of thing about 3.5 millimeters. You can go onto YouTube and find and see a bit of where you can find these things at Grantham. So let's look specifically at South East Scotland. Well, there is a historical account of intertidal isopods and other isopods in South East Scotland from Scott 1899, who recorded 23 species of marine isopod in the Firth of Forth. 12 of those were sublittoral species beyond the abilities of most of us to find. One curiously adventive species found in barnacles in the hull of a boat that was followed for cleaning, and then 6 or 7 species. It's not all about here, one of them is found in the south shore of the Firth, 6 or 7 species. There's that tiny little isopod I talked about before. He reported that one as well. So that's the previous record from that. But if you look at if you were looking at the NBN Atlas Online in 2017, you would have seen that in the southeast Scotland, in the Twick recorded area, there were 37 records of intertidal isopods between Stirling and the border, involving 8 species. Most of the records were Editia granulosa, which is uncommon bigbos. A few other species as well. There were 4 sublittoral records of Casticella longicornis, and then there were 2 unexpected records of Dynamini bidennicata from the Porcupine Creek meeting in Berkshire in 2009. And I've been trying for years to get the one of these 2 records because it shouldn't be here and it may not have been here, but I don't really want to know for sure. That's a site of species unexpected to turn up there. And there were 2 records on the same day to turn up in slightly different spots. It's interesting. So they're very clearly recorded. So if you want to write a proposal, I'd love to see some of your listing records. That's what the situation was in 2017 when I started recording intertidal isopods in South East Scotland. And I've been doing field work in hectares between Stirling and the border and indeed beyond in various other places as well. Throughout Britain and Ireland and indeed beyond that as well. I've been about 160 records covering 20 or 21 species of intertidal isopods in the list there. The ones with an asterisk have only been encountered once, maybe more than one individual, but only once in my survey. I also found an unexpected record of another southwest English species in a scraping of some barnacles from Sicker Point in Berkshire. But I slightly don't believe I found it, and I'm refusing to accept that I found it. I'm trying to work out did I contaminate with something else, I'm not sure. But I've been back once and not found it, but that needs to be reconfirmed. So lots of things you can find, and there will be other species maybe that can be added for as well. Lots of work to do filling in distribution gaps, finding other instances of rare recorded species, checking for those weird vectors to see whether they're backed up by anything or not. Adding other species. There's a few species which are found in Northumberland which haven't been recorded in South East Scotland, such as Editia chalybes found in Lindisfarne and Parvanatha found as far as Myrtlecoast. I've not been able to find that in South East Scotland either. Here's a very impacted map of my recording efforts. You can see I found nothing so far at Stirling, and this is very intertidal. There's a little bit here, which has got some tidal flow on it, but nothing so far. Likewise, there's a little bit of the river here, which is slightly intertidal, so almost nothing coming from there. You can see there's a west to east gradient with more stuff being found out to the west, less to the east. But that's complicated by the fact that some of these parts of the coast are actually difficult to get to, so the records are poor there. So the Firth of Forth, I'm less familiar with the North Shore, but the South Shore goes from sandy, open shore beaches to suddenly barnacle encrusted stuff here to muddiness increasing, and then you're visiting into estuarine environments and the rural environments of here. Okay. So let's look at some of the distributions of the species I've been finding. This, first of all, is the woodlouse Ligia oceanica. There's an example of repelling of Ligia. And you can see, these are not just my records, these are records from everybody from my record, but lots of them are my records. It's found the whole way up to Alloa and all the way down around 5, and probably pretty much every area has them. especially where there's hard surfaces. You won't get them on sandy beaches or on mud, but I have found them in soft marsh areas under the bricks and whatnot as well. Let's move on to the strictly intertidal isopods. These are, this is a species called Myriad albifrons, extremely common, but we're up to 5 millimeters for the females, about 3 millimeters for the males. The males are the ones you need for identification purposes. These are pretty much all my records. You can see I haven't been in the fight at all. I've gone right up here. There's some chances for my friend maybe even slightly further up the floor, but they're well distributed throughout the whole area. Okay. If you turn stones on hard surfaces in the upper intertidal, you'll find them. They do need microscopic examination to be identified. Here's a closely related species from the same genus, Gira nordmania. I know these because they look like little pizzas or dustbin lids or whatever. They're about 4 millimeters long. Much more easily identified, although you do need to look at the underside of the males, and you can just about do that at hand, and it's better than dissect in microscope. But a curious distribution. They seem to be common Northumberland up to Eyemouth and even to Sickle Point here in Cove. And then they're absent for the rest, and yet they're almost a freshwater edge species, so they should be the whole way around here. Haven't been able to find them anywhere around here, and then one day I was at Black Ness and found them in a couple of areas here at Black Ness. But otherwise, I'm not been able to find them, so that's one to look out for. They're abundant with Eyemouth. If you want to get to know this species, go to Eyemouth, go to the little bit of the river that's just above the harbour, that's still intertidal. There's hundreds of every stone, so really nice to see. This is one of our common species, Editia granulosa, quite a big species. You'll find it under bladder rock on rocky shores all through the area. And it seems to stop just before Bowness and not being able to find it, but that's because of the lack of hard shores, I suspect. But it's very commonly recorded on the whole area. Okay. So look out for that one. And again, I've got a video on YouTube you can look at those as well. We can contrast that with Editia marginata, which grows even bigger. I'll just click back. It's covered by the black thing, but it's got an elongated, what we call pleotelson with a single point at the end. The shape of the rear end of Editia is important. This is Editia marginata, it's got the margin of its pleotelson, and that's enough to identify the species. You can see it doesn't occur in the Firth Forth at all. It's on the sandy beaches out further out. So you can see quite a different distribution there. You start getting even these sandy beaches around you can find them on. So, this is a map showing the distribution of two of the kind of spirit species that occur in our area, Rugicoda and Picari. And Picari is found at river mouths, so this is the area at the mouth here of the river S. This is at the mouth of the river Almond, and this is at the here at the mouth of the river Bowness. The rest are Rugicoda, which is a salt marsh and muddy estuarine species. So here they're in the Swan Berry, Hinningham, Aberlady, and then up here that should get up into the river, of course. And there's a good chance that might be found further in up the river as well. Okay, so those are worth looking out for. The best way to find Rugicoda is go to a salt marsh, sit down and have your sandwich next to a salt marsh pool, and they'll be swimming around it. And they swim in a curious fashion. They're not fast swimmers. They kind of look very inefficient swimmers. They use these two little things, they're Isopods, to paddle on, and we see it buzz around. How can you contribute? Well, as I say, our understanding and distribution of ecology of these species is rudimentary. They're poorly recorded. There's a manageable number of species, IDs, mostly not difficult. Their biogeography isn't well understood in the region. The first of the four is maybe at the upper northern and northeastern limit for many species, so it's a useful place to examine. We're uncertain of the effects of the environment and climate change on the distributions. So there's a little bit of scope for adding to our knowledge of this fascinating group of organisms. Thank you. This is Genera maculosa found at Billsdene under rock at extreme low tide. It's not an uncommon species, but this is a really found these sites. Thank you.